Welcome, my friend. Hello again. Hello again. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Uh, Pass the mic. Okay. It's like passing the mic one times to me, one times to you. For our topic today, because the time is running, and actually I think they gave us 2 minutes to prepare for it, but I think they gave me 2 minutes. There's two things that I talked about in the challenge. I don't mean challenge; it's discussion to be that we learn from each other. There's two things. Firstly, that human cannot achieve justice. The other thing, that it should be by a diving guide. So there's 2 points. We will discuss the first point, which that to prove that human cannot achieve justice. Then, when we finish from it, we'll go to the other point, which is there should be a diving guide. Firstly, I have many different points. One of the points that there are a lot of factors in the balance of justice that human cannot measure or guarantee to uh, bring, such as the psychological side effects and the time and the health. For example, when a matter happens between two persons, when you go to the court, they will try to give you what you deserve based on what they see and what they understand. But what you are feeling, no one will pay for that. What you felt, because a different catastrophe from someone to another one, it may have different impacts, depends on the personality of this person. Someone who lost, for example, his family, he might cannot live all the life without them. Other one can pass this and continue. So when you hurt someone and the law gives you the same judgment for the same fault, uh, it doesn't apply to everyone. Some people, for example, get affected more than others. So they didn't measure the emotional side and the health side. For example, when you go in a matter, on a problem or on a case, this exhausts you and take from your health. Maybe it took a years, like a war, or uh, like a work you worked for a long time, and for example for a petrol field or gas field, this affects your health, and they don't measure it in the law when they give you your rights.
Do you want me to pass it back to you so you can finish your point? Okay. All right. So I want to just ask a question to see if we can narrow down this a little bit. When you're talking about justice, you brought up in your beginning statement that you're talking about when pain or hurt, or you're talking about during a war if someone loses a feeling. Now, I would argue that while those cases can be arbitrated by humans, they definitely are more difficult. Would you agree, though? I want to make sure we can come to a baseline. Would you agree that there are situations, say, where humans aren't necessarily impacted by loss of family or by a war? There are at least some situations where human beings can measure out justice. I would say that there are certain things where an action is done where there's not a lot of damage done. Say a child takes a piece of candy, something that's not very important to them, that is not, and maybe they want that candy, they get upset, and the thing to justice can be handled by giving the candy back, or by taking a toy of the same value, which is very little if a child doesn't value, say, a particular object or something. So do you think there are any situations at all where human beings can achieve justice? Do you think it is only on major conflicts or major disagreements where justice can't be measured out, but that there are smaller ones where the human effect is minimal, where that justice can be measured by humans? I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I agree on this, but in one condition. When we talk about justice, that what's the meaning of justice, that which we apply in our daily life. So therefore, when I make equality between two persons, there should be a purpose of being equal. Therefore, if justice is just making us, we do justice or practice justice like equality, just to have a current satisfaction for the present moment, that's different from looking toward justice as something which purpose, with a very something which is for a bigger thing, and talks about universal thing, and that takes in it all the situations, all the factors. Therefore, and this depends on my view to the universe. When I look at the universe, I look at the universe as something which is totally connected with each other, and nothing is much less than other. Everything in this life is have its value, and nothing is more than important than other. Everything complete the other thing. Therefore, when I look at justice, I look at justice as a part of a whole system, as something that balances the system. And therefore, if I apply justice in a one situation, that will be good, but it will not guarantee for me to keep the whole system going in the right way. Like if you see, you have a ship, and the ship, there is some crack in the ship. It happens like 10 times. The water comes from this side, and you stop the water from this side, but you keep the water going in the other side of the ship. And therefore, this looks to me not meaningful. And there will not be any benefit, because if this happened, this will not guarantee that justice covers everyone. And this is the meaning of justice. It should be general and covers everything. And therefore, this is uh, uh, as a human, I see that we are limited, we make mistakes, we cannot guarantee justice. But uh, this enters in the matter of faith, when you believe that you did what you have to do, and there is a super powerful or supernatural power that will take care of the rest and will treat you in a different way, that I would like to talk about later. But firstly, I want to clear this point, the first point which you talk about it, and I will pass for you the mic to see what your response about it.
So I like the idea that you're talking about justice is about equality. I think we can assume that, at least I would assume that when you're talking about justice, we're going to say that that is only as applies to humans versus other humans. It seems like we don't argue that the way we treat animals that we eat, or plants that we eat, or uh, inanimate objects that aren't human, or that we don't have a consciousness, we don't think that we treat them with any injustice by say killing and eating them, or by killing ants. We're not saying we're treating them unjustly. All right, so we're saying that when you're talking about equality, it seems to me you're saying that human beings should be treated equally. Now, I don't disagree that human beings should be treated equally. Now, what I do think we're going to disagree on a little bit is what we define as justice. To me, justice is simply when you have a set of laws or a set of rules that are in place, and they dictate behavior. So when you have an agreement, and then someone breaks that agreement, then there are certain consequences that are already agreed on in the rules. So when you say the justful punishment of X, you have to go to something external, the way you feel. Now, you talked about earlier about how people feel. Now, we know that how we feel is subjective. We know that way we feel about some actions against us can be different on whether or not we're having a good day or a bad day. So we know that since they're subjective, they don't have any real value when we're measuring out justice. So we have to go to something that's objective. So what we have as being objective, I would say, is our agreed upon law. So if we have come to an agreement in our society that we have agreed to live under these certain rules, these certain regulations, and that's an objective standard that we live in, that if we are not living by those standards, then we're being unjust. If we are living by those standards, then we're being just, and we're treating people the base. So when you're talking about justice, I'm just going to ask you just to clarify again your definition, because it seems to me that you're talking about something more than what human beings agree is just, that there's something else that they're appealing to. But how, if something out there that they're appealing to, if the human beings are flawed, as you say, how we can recognize then what justice is? If we're so flawed that we can't determine what justice is ourselves, how are we going to be able to trust any determination we have about some divine justice if it's not spelled out in human created and agreed upon laws?
Thank you, Mike. And what I want to say to you that in my definition to justice, I don't go a lot far of your definition, which says it's like agreements and certain laws that we respect and we follow and we agreed about it as a society or as a. But the problem comes here that we are today living in a war and a big world which is became connected to each other. You know, globalization, the open of network. This makes us meet with each other from different cultures, different backgrounds, and different values. Some things which I see right, the others from other culture may look at it as wrong. So there is different values, and therefore we want to apply, we want to balance. We balancing like you putting some heavy materials on one side and soft materials on the other side. There is kind of different thoughts that appears between us, which uh, doesn't let us reach a point of agreement that what we can see as humans, what is justice and what we can't see. Because, for example, uh, for killing of person in a one country, it might be not lead him to death punishment or death penalty, while another country would lead him to death penalty, and therefore those will see it justice, this will see it unjust, and therefore this shows me as humans that we cannot uh, acquire justice or we cannot apply justice in general between all of us based on our views and our thoughts. So we need something which is bigger than us that makes us, we all believe in it and we all go toward it. We all submit to it as everyone because this thing will prove to us that uh, based on our limited knowledge to this big world, we know little, and therefore, if this supernatural power or this God uh, knows more than us and have the ability toward everything, when He will apply justice on us, He will apply it. For example, justice. He will manage justice between us, not between us and Him, because the situation between us and God, for if you as a believer of God, is different from the situation of justice between a human and human. Therefore, maybe I lose something, I lost money, I lost my health, but when I keep it for God, He will satisfy me with different things. I will be satisfied and in a different way. But that way that you cannot satisfy me as a human by whatever you achieved.
Okay. All right. So I like the idea that you're talking about different cultures, different values, but I approach it from a different direction. Okay, I say one culture has 10 values that they hold above all others, and another culture also has 10 values that they hold above all other. So when they come together, you can see that maybe 8 of those 10 values in each culture are different. So you have maybe two that are the same: not killing of innocent civilians, or protecting our young, or doing something like that. So you can find cultural values. To use your own example, when you're talking about a boat with water coming in from one side or another, and you stopping one and not being able to stop the other, if you look at that as being a metaphor for those two cultures that are come together, what they can do is all that extra baggage that they have, that are the values that are not shared by the other society, they can just jettison them out. And so when they finally get rid of all the extra baggage, you're going to raise the boat up above the waves, so it's held together with common values. So then it's going to say humans have come together. They've gotten rid of the stuff in the culture that conflict that they don't agree on, or maybe that's something that one values high and the other one doesn't value at all. They get rid of those and focus on those values that they do share. And then when one person of that culture, one individual of that culture, or those two combined cultures that are sharing those values, those fewer values definitely, but sharing those core values, when an individual comes and does something against those, then everyone that's involved agrees that that person has done an injustice and can mete out some sort of justice that the human beings can agree on, so that even though they come from different backgrounds, they can find a common thing where they can, at least in some situations, uh, mete out their own justice, and they don't need to have a divine guide. Also, and if they have no values that are the same, but they still want to work together. Say two cultures come and they value things completely differently. They can't find those cores, but they still want to work together. Well, then they define them. The cultures say, when we're dealing with one another, X is wrong, and if one individual of the culture does X, then that's an injustice that has to be meted out, and they can have an agreed upon punishment. So in that case, you have humans coming together, creating what they all agree is their own justice. And I don't know how we can go beyond saying that humans agree something is just and that a retaliation is just, or that a certain behavior is just. And once every human involved agrees, that seems to be that they've achieved their own set of justice. I'll pass it back to you.
That's one of the best ideas that I heard ever in my life. It's very simple, very easy. I think any human can understand this point and can find it easy to apply. But the question comes, why didn't? Why until today, through the thousands of years that we lived in this planet, we couldn't apply this idea? It's simple that can to any brain of any human. It doesn't need a lot of education. But the problem is that the humans are uh, proved through the historical experiences, through the from the beginning of history, that there are some human that will not be stick with this. Some humans who who apply their desire more than the respect of other rights, and the fact is that, uh, for example, today wars, racial discrimination, and religious discrimination. However, it still exists until today with all of this education, with all of and the when you look at the world leaders, most of world leaders are involved in many different crimes, war crimes, corruption, and the problem is, though most of those leaders are elected by a majority of people, majority of. So you look at this situation that most of people accept this when even it looks like a wrong thing. And therefore, if you look at, for example, at the International Court of Justice in La Haye, for example, it doesn't suits everyone. Not every criminal goes there. International criminal and international wars. Some they cannot. For example, I don't want to mention names, but there are some people who I can uh, uh, see them coming to every day in media, and they are involved in many different crimes. They kill any innocent people, they steal a lot of money, but they are still far away from justice. And this shows us that the majority, the elite, who are voted by us as a human, who are chosen by us, who were given the authority, they don't apply justice. Those are our top humans, and therefore, if you look at those, the most intelligent, the most unique, they couldn't apply it. How can the rest apply justice? So therefore, I think the laws, there should be a meaning in everything. When justice lose its universal meaning, it become lower interest. They don't care about.
Okay, I get what you're saying, and and I agree with you. Some of the things you see going on in the world, uh, and you see individuals that this person has done some things that, and they're not being given the justice that I think they deserve or that somebody thinks they deserve. But I think overall that you're selling human beings short a little bit when you're saying that we haven't yet been able to put in the simple practices of jettisoning those values from one culture to another. The way I understand history, human beings have been around for many thousands of years. We started out in small, isolated groups or tribes, and we've come together, and now we have cities in the United States and different countries where you have millions of people with numerous backgrounds living together, surviving, working together. Oftentimes they have huge differences in religion, differences in race, differences in culture. They all work together, and everyone knows that when you do certain acts, that's being an injustice. They've agreed it. Now, granted, that hasn't taken place on a global scale yet. I mean, we can both agree that we're not one giant happy global family yet, but we're getting closer to it. We have a huge number of people living together. We know how to interact with other cultures. We know how to interact with other religions. So I think that what we're doing is getting better, and that we will eventually reach the point where everyone has jettisoned all the baggage that they need, and we have those core values, and everyone will have a universal system of justice that all humans agree upon. But you make a point, and I'm going to push back a little bit on you saying that, humans haven't been able to get it together yet, haven't been able to live together. I'm going to say that since the first human was created, if there was a divine guide, that divine guide has had that time since the first human, much longer than human societies have been living together and working together. So I'm saying that if we're saying that as of right now, we don't have an agreed upon value system, then the divine guide is obviously not guiding us very well. If it's the same, if there's only one divine guide that exists, then it's guiding different groups of humans from all over the world in different directions, which seems to be, if it's hoping to achieve some sort of unified human justice or understanding of justice, it wouldn't have done that. So what I see is that human beings are finding more justice, are finding a way to work together, to live together, to creative justice of their own. And it is, if a divine guide exists, they're doing this in the face of what's obviously happening, which is the divine guide keeping us from coming together.
Thank you very much. You mentioned very. It's okay. You mentioned many different points. I'll try to take them point by point. The first thing that you mentioned, that we are as a society, for example, from numerous backgrounds, we are living together, working together, and for example, but if you mean integration, unfortunately, most of the cities like United States, Europe, uh, the foreigners who came or the immigrants, they still suffer from a lot of discrimination. They suffer uh, a lot of social problems to integrate with the society, and there is a lot of things that we hear every day in media talking about problems, crimes that occurs between them, and this one example. The second thing that I want to talk to you about, and you mentioned, is that the diving guide, and that doesn't show us that it is uh, guiding this universe in the right way, and uh, there's some matter in the situation. I want to tell you that from my from my faith, from my religion, from what I believe and what I was taught, that there are people who I saw and noticed myself. There are people, and we believe, as you mentioned in the beginning of history, that most of people live together in small groups, and then they start to expand. What happened? That when people became more, uh, disagreements start to appear, and therefore prophets were sent to give people teachings and to guide them and to show them. But what happened? That some people, even they dispute after knowing the facts, after knowing the truth, they start to dispute. Not before, not based on ignorance, not because they don't know, no, but because they know, they uh, they made mistakes. And I, this is a very different topic, but just to mention it, and this will lead us to another discussion, religious, to study religions, and I don't want to go this. I want to stick with justice. I'll give you one case. I'll give you one case. It's about Dudley and Stephen that happened in 1884. If you know this case, uh, in England, this case about four persons went to the sea, and their sea was crashed, and they survived in a small boat. I will complete for you the story if you will give me a few seconds. They kept in the boat, and they have only two cans of kind of vegetable. You can hear me? Okay. They survived in a small boat. They were four. Was a kid who was 17 years old, and he's orphaned, and he went with them. He wanted to be a man. He wanted to be something in the society. There was the Captain Dudley, Stephen, and Brooks, and Barker. The Barker is the smallest, the youngest one. When they were in the small boat, they didn't eat anything for the first 3 days, and the fourth day, they start to eat the food that they had, but it's finished in the same day. And the fifth day, they were so lucky that they found a turtle, and they took it from the sea, and they start to feed from it until the eighth day. And the eighth day, the Captain Dudley said, someone should sacrifice. Uh, we'll make like a coin or something to check who will be the turn to him to sacrifice. But Brooks refused that. Therefore, Dudley looked at Barker, the young boy. He's 17 years old. He was sick from drinking the water sea. He looked toward Stephen and told Stephen, kill this boy and we will survive. They killed the boy, and they started to eat from him, and they kept feeding from him for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, a German ship took them, found them in the sea, and took them to Malthpart in England. As soon as they got there, they were caught by the government, and they took to the court. The judge saw them, and he said, murder is a murder. However, this case, after 2 months, they got these two men. For example, because Brooks refused to kill the boy, but even though he started to eat from his flesh, but Stephen and Dudley was taken to the court and stayed for 2 months, I think. After that, they got free. They were left free. So, what's your judge in this? Where can I find justice in this? I want to hear you. Okay.
So your question is whether I can find justice in punishment or in the action. I want to be specific. You want me to know where the justice is in the ruling of the English courts, or in the ruling or in the decision to kill the small boy? If you just clarify, then pass it back to me.
I want justice in the judgment. This act of human, this murder, how can we justice on it? How to apply it?
It seems to me that what they did seems very rational. The court looks at the situation and says, "Listen, you're a human being. You live in this set of societies. We have these set of rules. It is against our laws to murder. So we are going to label you as a murderer. But we understand that you have some sort of extenuating circumstances. So we're going to mitigate your punishment based on those certain circumstances and your own reconnaissance and the fact that you only did it to survive. But to say that those individuals that killed him accept and think, and I would assume accept and said, yes, what we did was murder. We did it because we had no choice, but what we did is true. So they would not think, at least in my opinion, that they would be treating unjustly. Now, if they had been, they would accept the charge of murder because, I mean, clearly the act of killing the boy was murder. They ended the individual's life when they could have easily have sacrificed their own life. They chose to murder the young boy. So they accept that based on their society that they live in, that they are murderers. So it is just, they would agree that it is justice for them to be labeled as murderers. Now, they may think that it was too harsh, that they would, if they were going to say life in prison for the murder, if that was the punishment for for murder, that it was mandatory. But I mean, that's not how our justice system works. We take into extenuating circumstances. But an act of murder, to be called a murderer for murdering somebody, is justice. I mean, I would think everyone involved recognizes that what was done was murder. Those individuals are labeled as murderers and would be charged and forever identified as murderers. But then they mitigated their punishment, saying that they did it for their own survival. In the United States, we of course have laws, as backward as some might think they are, about being able to murder people or be able to kill people for your own protection in certain circumstances, even if the person may be unarmed. I mean, there's different rules that says, yes, what you're doing is X, but the punishment that you face is going to be mitigated. So I don't think did anyone in that example that you're aware of feel like what was done was unjust?
Uh, you mean the Dudley and Stephen? They felt that what they did unjust, for example, or for the audience?
Either way, if the Dudley and Stephen, do they feel like they were unjustly caused murderers? I mean, I can't see how they would be able to make that argument. Or do people? I'm interested to hear your opinion on this. I mean, do you feel like justice was meted out? I mean, based on the laws, they are called murderers. They murdered somebody, so that seems to be just that they murdered somebody. Now they're labeled as murderers. I mean, how do you feel that situation? Should they not have been labeled as murderers? I'd be interested to hear your response.
For me, you know, the job of a judge is a very, very complicated job, and I'm still too small to be a judge. But I'll try to give you some defendings for them, and some other side who he don't so the didn't like to defend Dudley and Stephen. This case was discussed in Harvard University in a lecture for professors. Michael Scandal. It's a very, very famous lecture that happened in 2008, shown on YouTube. See, some people who try to defend Dudley and Stephen, they say uh, mean justify the end. They are we're going to die, and someone who want to die will do anything to survive. This one. The second thing they said, those two guys were in the sea for 10 days, hungry, fear, tiredness, and in this situation, man can lose his ability to think properly. He might get hallucination or something. He might think wrongly and uh, lose his ability to control himself because of hunger and because of fear and the situation that they were in it. So the third one, they said that also uh, from a different perspective, like someone should when they choose the boy, it was a good choice because someone said this is a very bad act. Why they choose the boy? Why didn't they survive? Why they didn't choose the one? Why didn't Stephen kill Dudley or Dudley killed Stephen or Prox? Why they choose the boy? Because he's orphaned, because he's sick, because he's weak, he cannot defend himself. The others say no, they choose the boy because he's an orphan, he has no relation to society, he's not connected, no one cares about them. But those people have families, have children, have uh, their place in the society. They're giving some service to the society, they are more helpful to humanity, their life is more valuable because it's connected with different people. But this still cannot compare because we don't know the future of this boy. Sometimes um, uh, maybe a future of the nation stops on one guy, the leader of it, and his decisions who rules it. So sometimes one person uh, become very, very important for a lot of people. So we don't know the future of this boy, and we can't judge about this. And the third thing that I want to mention for you, that in this situation I see that there should be we cannot, this is an example that we cannot apply a universal justice, because you will agree on something, the others will agree on a different thing, even in one society, and because it had.
You want it back? Okay. Now, I like the idea that you brought up that there may not be something that's universal justice. So I think if we look at it in a very narrow way to say that action X always means action or always means consequence Y, that you're never going to be able to agree that just that a society or even a small society won't be able to agree on consequences to whatever action X being explicitly one. However, I don't think it's fair to say that a society can't come to an agreement on what a range of consequences are. So if someone does X, people will say that if they are punished in any sort of these several ways or in this class of ways, that that is justice. For instance, if somebody murders somebody in cold blood, and are you familiar with the term in cold blood, like plans and kills somebody? Uh, then we can say, well, it's justice to put that person in prison for a long period of time, or it's justice. It's also justice to either kill this person. So, while one group say it's the just act is to be able to put them in prison, the other person said the just act is killing them. We can all agree that the society can say that if somebody murders someone in cold blood, humans can agree that, well, either they need to be put in jail for a long time or they need to be put to death. So now we have come to a class of justice. So where an individual, we give them the power, judge, is to decide what exactly that is going to be. Either he's going to be put to death. The judge can take into in mitigating circumstances. Maybe he's hallucinating because he's been on a boat for a long time. So maybe we'll just put him in prison for a certain amount of time. But we can come to an agreement as a society, or humans can come together and say, for every class of action, there is a class of responses that is considered just. Now, for a counterexample, we can say if an individual kills somebody, people can say, well, maybe a just act is to kill that person, or maybe a just act is to kill that person and their family. Now, some people are going to agree that if someone kills somebody, it is not just to kill that person and their family. Others people might say, but there's going to be a point where humans will come to an agreement that says if one individual kills another individual, it is not justified to kill the first individual's entire city. I mean, there'll come a point where human beings can agree where something there would be an unjustified response. So to say that every action should have a single action is not something that human beings can agree on. But to say that every action humans can come and achieve a set of actions that are considered just.
I got you. But this reminds me by World War One. The World War One, which millions of people died in. The reason behind this war was one crime by the Serbian guy who killed the crown prince of what they call it. I forget the name of that country. You know the country. Okay. Uh, See, because of one crime, because that was a prince and this was from a different country. This, yani, burn out the combustible atmosphere and made a world war. And therefore, I think that as a human, we are an emotional creatures. We cannot think without using our emotions, involving our emotions in our thought. Whatever we was, philosophers or thinkers, that to be only depends on your mind without having any effect, even 1% of your feeling, it's impossible. Therefore, our feeling is involved. When our feeling is involved, this means that measurements of the case of justice will be inaccurate by us. Therefore, there should be something, if there is something which is uh, exists, a rule, an instruction, we totally do not understand this instruction, and we might understand some parts of it, but we cannot take over it because we are limited, and therefore we don't know the results, the what will come as a result of this instruction and following it. Therefore, it should be it should be like this, even if we don't know, because when you ask an evidence for something, you can't ask 1 million questions to be convinced. At the end of the day, you should believe in it to accept it, and therefore, uh, even when there is things that you can accept directly without uh, having you can accept, even you would like or you don't like if the fire burns, you can accept this fact anyway. And therefore, when you start to think about uh, this higher instructions out of our control, out of our uh, ability and knowledge, but we understand that this have uh, a good. Uh, I'll give you one story in the next, but let us. I hope you got this point. Then I'll give you more explanation about it if you have any question.
Okay. Did you want me to pass it back to you? Okay.
You, there is a story in Quran about a kid, about Musa, the Prophet Musa. We call it, you call it Moses, I think. We call it Musa. We call him Musa. He was in a trip and he saw a child, and he was with a man who knows a lot of knowledge, have a lot of knowledge. He saw the kid, he killed the kid. The Prophet said to him, "Why you are killing this kid? And he's innocent." He said, "You don't know what he will be in his future." People like, for example, like Hitler, like big criminals in the history who killed a lot of people with no reason. uh, if you saw them as kids, you will not let them go. You will say, if the government killed this man because he's poisoned, he will do a lot of things if he grow up. He's a threat to humanity. He's a threat to the existence. So there is a future knowledge that we don't know. And when we apply a certain type of justice, a certain type of laws, we see it as a justice that will apply justice. We don't know the result that will come in the long term, but we might see some results in the present, but we don't know the result that will come in the long term. And this is means that what we can see as good value today, tomorrow can be a bad value, unless if we have faith on it. We have an optimistic thought, even whatever we saw kind of results, because we feel that it will go up and down for a long time, but at the end of the day, it will go in the right place. Therefore, I thought about this will open us to a discussion on atheism and belief and God. I'll give it to you from the end. You have enough evidence that makes your desire satisfied. I can't prove it for you, but my only proof is that I believe. That I believe. So therefore, faith itself is the evidence for the right thing. But you will say from another perspective, but some people believe in different things that we see that it is wrong and you see it's right. And in this condition, I will say, let's experience them, test these things, and we will test them on our limitation, in our scope. So what's beyond the scope, we cannot talk about. And therefore, in the in the limited range, in the clear range for us, we can talk, we can discuss, we can debate, but what comes outside the borders of our minds, we cannot talk, and therefore the only thing that comes to it is faith. And we can have a different discussion about this, but I like to give you this idea because it's very important.
All right. So we can move it a little bit into this towards this direction. So I'm going to push back a little bit here. You said that given the story of Moses and you asking the individual, why did you kill that boy? He's innocent. And the guy says, you don't know what he will become. So if you want to put your faith that a divine guide will be able to decide, well, whatever happens in the world will happen, and then divine guide will guide it. And in the end result is going to be a positive. You don't know what the end result is going to be. You don't know what you're going to emotionally feel about that end result, because being a human, we can even agree that our human emotions in the moment are very powerful. When you get to that end result, if we assume a divine guide, you may feel very bad and, oh, I don't like this end result, but okay, I'm going to accept it because of the divine guide. To me, that seems to be no different than if we establish human laws for the present and we act on them and say that when we make a decision, we're going to base it on these laws. We don't know what the future is going to be. And when we get there, we may have a visceral reaction to it, or emotional reaction to it, where oh man, we shouldn't have done that. That's not what I wanted it to be, but that's what the laws have led us. So I have to accept that that's what reality is now. So to me, that there's no difference there between being a divine guide or the human guide. I mean, it just seems to me that if we get to the end and we can accept that at the end we may like the result, we may not, but we're going to accept that that is the way it is, then we might as well go with our own human derived laws, because at least we have justifications we have now. Where if we go with a divine guide, we don't understand whatever the justifications are. We don't know, because the divine guide is inscrutable to us. We don't know if it's good. We don't know if it's bad. We don't know if the prophet is actually interpreting correctly. We can't know 100% sure that certain individuals are interpreting our guidance. So if we don't have the justifications beside we're being led by a divine guide, then when we end up at the same place, at least in the present, at the moment, when we have our own laws that human beings have agreed on together, then we have justifications for those. So when everyone says, well, look where we are in the future, we don't really like that. How did we get here? What decisions did we make? We can look back and say, okay, here's why we did that. It was a good idea at the time. It turned out not. So we're going to change it in the future. When you have a divine guide, if we do something in a certain way following the divine guide, and it turns out some way where we feel bad about it, that we don't want this to be, we don't want the way this turned out, that's not what we wanted. Well, we can't go back and change it, because we can't say that the divine guide was wrong. So there's no way to correct.
You're right. This is, I think, this is it depends on what we are talking about, because when we talk about the laws of the avant-garde uh, in economics and in politics and scientific, this difference. But when we talk about something moral, is also different. Therefore, I think from the moral side, uh, it is different from the economic side. We can may have our space and things which as comes from the present, things that are functional and not spiritual, things like yeah, materialistic things, based on very simple, based on what we call just equality, uh, rights of others. See today, we as a global society, we don't suffer uh, uh, we don't suffer from just injustice, or in economics or in science or in in functional things, because these things are simple and clear for everyone. But the issue that comes most of the time is moral issue, is a kind of manners that we have uh, in ourselves. Therefore, corruption and killing, all of this bad things that human participate in it, this comes from a moral side, not from uh, a materialistic side. Therefore, from a materialistic side, we have been, as a Muslim, I'm given a very, very big space to judge, to think, to measure, because it's clear, and it is, I can't touch. But from a moral side, here the situation become totally different, because everyone sees that he's the right. You know, the Carly Two Guns who killed a lot of policemen in New York, when he was sent to death penalty, he said, "I have beside inside my a heart that doesn't hit anyone. That's my. You pay me like this. I came to save humanity, and for that you are killing me." This guy is a big criminal and looks at himself as an angel. You see the situation, because he's talking from a moral side. Therefore, from a moral side, we cannot judge on each other. But if there is something which is standard that we believe in it, we stop in front of it, the situation.
Okay, so I think I'm going to have to push back, and I'm going to frame it, since we're getting close to the end of the debate. I'm going to flip this around and say that the only way that human beings can achieve any semblance of justice between themselves is to ignore all divine guides. The only way that human beings can work together and agree on what a sense of justice is to ignore anything that they're taught by prophets, to ignore anything they're taught by holy books, and to come together and say, listen, you and me, my society and your society, we want to work together. What do we have to do to work together? Let's set these rules. Let's live by these rules. When we live by these rules, that's what justice is. If you live by these rules, you're being just. If you don't live by these rules, you're being unjust, and we will remove you from our combined society. That is the only way that human beings are going to be able to come to justice. Now, as you're pointing out, individuals that feel like they're divinely driven, seems like that's going to impede having this agreement to work together, because you're going to have those individuals that feel like what they believe is above whatever agreement the human beings have with one another. So they're going to say that I spit on your agreed upon justice. So any act that they make that is not agreed upon is unjust by the society standards. So if you have a divine guide, because there are so many, and there's not just one, and there's people believe that they're divinely driven to go different ways. Some, and even assuming that one of these divine guides exists and is telling an individual to do something true, we'll never know which one. As human beings, it is impossible for us to know that if a certain individual that says I'm acting because the one true God is telling me to act a certain way, the rest of society will never be able to know if that person is telling the truth, or if that person is just someone else that's mistaken. So the only way that they can continue to exist and have true justice is to ignore all those that say that they're divinely driven or divinely guided, and just develop their own justice together. What does this open up for? This means that any action that is outside the realm of what the agreed upon between the two cultures are, or the three cultures, or the worldwide culture, is going to be considered unjust. So since religion often drives people to odds with one another, especially over their religions or certain practices, the only way that human beings are going to be able to find true justice among each other is to be completely atheistic, at least in their politics. If they can keep their religion outside of their politics, then they'll be able to actually have true justice.
I want to tell you that when you talk about those who are say that we are divinely guided, uh, uh, those people are different, are not all the same. Some of them, they have no reasonable evidence, they have no clear proof for that. But others, they are ready to debate for it, and they have something that they want to discuss with others. Something, but the problem is, see, in Islam, we debate in many cases, many very sophisticated cases. But the issue is that the wrong conception, the wrong understanding toward Islam.
I can't pass the mic back because it says that you run out of your time. So I'd love to hear the end of that. I would love to hear more about Islam. But it just seems to me that justice is something that's real and something that we recognize. It's when people agree that an individual is being treated unjustly, we recognize that. We recognize when in ourselves when we're being treated unjustly, and we know why, and we can articulate, I'm being treated unjustly because I should be treated like X. Now, the reason that we say I should be treated like X is because in our particular society, we agree that this is the proper behavior towards one another. What I may find unjust treatment of myself, another individual, another culture will find perfectly justified treatment. So we agree that justice can seem different between one another. But then when those two cultures come together, when I see an individual being treated in a way that I feel unjust, that's a conflict that we'll have to resolve. And human beings, when working together and negotiating for their societies, they're going to resolve that conflict, and they're going to come out to saying, okay, the way that I thought was being treated unjust, they've made a good point. So I was actually wrong, and being treated like that is perfectly justified for this situation. Or we could come to the agreement is that the other individual, the way they're being treated was completely unjustified. And so now if you treat somebody like you were before, then you're treating them unjustly. So human beings working together, mixing their cultures, finding their core values is where justice comes from. It is not something that we're given, because you can't have human beings. Everything that we're told about the divine guide comes through the mouth of human beings. Or, I mean, it has to. So we're never going to be 100% sure if another human being is telling the truth, or if another human being is truly a spokesperson for the design. They may actually. This is me even granting the fact that an individual may actually be the spokesperson for the design, the divine. They may be the case, but when they're telling me, I'm being told that this is the proper way, this is how justice should be done. If it conflicts with my agreements that I already have for my society, I'm never going to be able to know for certain that that person is 100% accurate. And I would never take the risk of jeopardizing my culture or my society and the stability of my society in order to change it for that one individual, or to do something that goes against what I consider just. You just would never take that risk, because justice is something that is completely human, and I think is only human. Thank you for the debate.